Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to share a few thoughts and reflections on creating safety for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth in society. I think it is absolutely essential that every person, every youth, every child, every elderly person, everyone in between, know always that whoever and whatever you find yourself to be, it's okay. And in all likelihood, whoever and whatever you find yourself to be is related to what your central purpose in life is. Most of us spend our entire lives figuring out what that purpose is, and more especially, how that purpose should express itself. That's not something that anyone else can tell you. And even venturing into that unknown territory is itself a kind of risky sort of activity to get into. To create a sense of safety for our youth, and for that matter, for children, for the elderly, and for all of us. It's not only about the youth, but there are specific challenges to being a youth and finding out that you might be gay or lesbian or bisexual, transgender. I talked with a woman once who had a gay son, and she described the time when her son came to her and said, "Mom, I think I might be gay." And I was so impressed with her answer as she looked at the son whom she loved unconditionally and simply said, "Well, I guess we'll find out." She didn't expect him to have the answer all at once. She didn't expect him to know in that moment. And by allowing him to be a person who was growing and developing in ways that couldn't readily be foreseen, she made it safe for him to explore those questions. She didn't require him to have the answers, to know the answers, or to move towards specific answers. There are numerous parents who, when they hear that their son or daughter may be discovering that they are gay or lesbian, or bisexual or transgender, that they kind of say, "Of course I still love you," but somehow underneath that, or by their actions, it becomes very clear that what they're really saying is, "Of course I still love you, but I still hope you'll turn out not to be that." And that sort of hesitation makes it dangerous to have open conversations, because perhaps it's a deep subconscious psychological emotional wiring, I'm not really sure, but it seems to me there is nothing more important to a child than to please his or her parents. Even when I tried myself to ignore it, even when I tried to say it's no big deal, still there is this deep part of me that wants more than anything to hear my father say that he's proud of me, to hear my mother say that she's proud of me. In my case, I have struggled for perhaps the majority of my adult life to accept that I will never hear that. My parents specifically made the choice that, or the decision, identified themselves as having disallowed an openly gay or lesbian person in their lives. They specifically did not want a gay or lesbian person in their lives, much less a gay or lesbian son or daughter. And the most respect I could show them was simply to say that if that's your choice, I will respect it and I will stay away. And if you ever change your mind, please let me know. If you ever get to the point where you are ready, you think, to begin integrating an openly gay person into your lives. The alternative would have been for me to live a lie, to be always pretending to be something I'm not, to try to embody their fantasy of what they wish I was, but which I could never be, because ultimately all we can be is ourselves. Society often creates these structures and expectations and dynamics that if you're not society's fantasy of what they want you to be, if you are not the perfect worker, the perfect whatever vocational role, the perfect relative, if you don't do everything perfectly the way society or various individuals in society think things should be done, then somehow you have to wrestle with their disappointment. You have to wrestle with their disapproval. You have to wrestle with the ways that you are punished or at the very least not rewarded for being genuinely who and what you are. Growing up, I often heard the phrase, honesty is the best policy. And consequently, it was very confusing to me when honesty was actually punished rather than rewarded. When someone would step forward and say, I'm really sorry, I was distracted for a moment and I accidentally hit your car and put a little dent in the bumper of your car, for example. And instead of someone saying, well, thank you for being honest, I'm sure we can work this out, the reaction might be, you did what? And suddenly, even though this person who made a mistake and is trying to be responsible for it has come forward, they're suddenly being punished for having disclosed that, I made a mistake, I want to be responsible for it, I'd like to take care of this, it's my fault, it was my mistake, I'm responsible, I need to pay for this somehow, I don't have a lot of funds, but I'm sure we can work something out. If in response to that attempt to do the right thing, they are suddenly being punished by having to deal additionally with an angry person who is just reacting to the occurrence of misfortune. Misfortune happens all the time. I understand anguish, I understand sadness, I understand that we need to deal with loss. Venting it or turning it or attacking the person who is simply trying to be honest and put truth at the center of the relationship. To say that something bad has happened, and if we work together, I think we can respond to it constructively, but there's nothing that will make the world as if it didn't happen. Creating safety for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender youth is about giving them a space where it's safe to be honest, where it's safe to say, I don't know, I made a mistake, I'm feeling something I don't understand. And instead of adding all kinds of negative or adversarial emotion to the event, to deal with our own emotions in the way that we find effective, but not to dump those emotions on them. To say, I'm feeling sad and I will deal with feeling sad. What I want you to know is that I love you and I will support you in exploring this question however you need to. And whether you happen to be a relative or a parent or a coworker or a close friend of whoever is going through these sorts of situations and wrestling with these sorts of questions, there is in that moment the honor and the privilege, if you will, of responding to a person in need and of being the one to make a most constructive difference. There are, in fact, many people who can trace their success in coming to terms with a difficult issue to a person who was compassionate and gentle and loving in that moment. A person who would not compromise the truth, but did not use the truth as a club to beat them with. That how could you be such a stupid person? You must have known better, whatever. There are all sorts of ways to give completely the wrong reaction. In fact, kind of a side note here, I guess, as an actor in acting school, I was contemplating once many years ago what it is that if you wanted to write the script for a soap opera on television, what would you do to write that script and make it effective? And what I noticed with amazing consistency is that it seemed to be about always giving the worst possible reaction to anything that happened. Instead of doing the best thing, the understanding thing, the loving thing, the honest, truthful thing, it would always be the worst possible reaction, becoming angry in a very explosive, abrupt way, engaging in deception to try to cover the problem and not deal with it directly. anything that was not loving, that was not kind, that was not centered or disciplined or holistic, overreacting to a detail that might actually not be of particularly great importance. I suppose it would be analogous to when I was in college and occasionally there would be a pop quiz or something and I wouldn't do very well on it. And I could obsess about that and really beat myself up. How could you possibly have failed that quiz? You know this subject. Instead, at one point, I very consciously began telling myself, reminding myself, that when something bad happened, the world is not going to come to an end. There was one time I even forgot to, I worked for a whole week on a final term paper for a particular course and got it done, printed it off, put it in my folder, went back to my dorm room, and discovered 3 days later I forgot to turn it in. And of course by that time the course had been scored, and I explained everything to the professor when I got back after Christmas break, and he looked it over and said it's actually a very good paper, but of course he'd already turned in the grade for the course. The wonderful thing is, though, even granting that he had already turned in the grade for the course before he had seen the paper, all the other work I'd done in the course actually gave me a passing grade. That paper was not essential to passing the course. It really didn't have as much power as I thought it would. And from that point on, when I saw a choice coming at me that said either you are going to engage in self-care or you are going to be obsessed about the assignment, and I chose to stop myself and say, no, I need a break right now. And there is nothing in this paper or in this studying or in this homework that is going to so ruin my life that it is worth doing this at the expense of my own psychological and emotional health. And so as I began to take care of myself holistically, minding my emotions and my thoughts and my relationships, and doing what I could, but avoiding obsession about it, I began to find myself feeling more centered and more healthy throughout the remaining years of my college education. In a similar sort of way, as young people may be finding themselves to be straight or gay or trans or bi or whatever, to give themselves the freedom to explore those things honestly and without attaching any kind of additional baggage to it. If I am gay, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If I'm straight, it's not necessarily a good thing. It just is what it is. These are not qualities that are in and of themselves good or bad or anything. If some people wish I was this and they're disappointed, that's their experience. And I'll be happy to help them work through it if I can. But trying to be what they want me to be instead of being who I truly am makes all of life dangerous, because it sets one on a track for lying to oneself, lying to others, engaging in a deception that ultimately can't stand, because truth is what it always comes back to. No matter what we do, no matter how many layers of paint we try to put on it, no matter how we try to hide it, truth always comes out. It's the one thing that is inescapable. In psychological discussions, people will sometimes talk about the elephant in the living room. No matter what you do to pretend that the elephant isn't there, the effects of having an elephant in your living room will still be unavoidable. There will be elephant dung to shovel out. There will be broken furniture. There will be very limited space within the room to do anything that you need to do. If you want to have a good time with friends, well, they have to tiptoe around the elephant because there's not a lot of room in there when an elephant is in your living room. Truth does not negotiate. Truth is what it is. We can try to gloss it over, we can try to avoid it, and ultimately it still prevails. It is what it is, and it's not going away. in trying to create safety for gay and lesbian youth in society, therefore, and for everyone else, because these youth are going to grow up to be adults and at some point become elderly persons also. And they will still be gay or straight or bi or trans or whatever. And in each of those phases, to create safety for them is also to create safety for ourselves. Everything is so interconnected that when we create safety for them, we ensure their best contribution to our world. If they are suffering and in need, the needs are truth, they won't go away. Needs demand to be met. If a legitimate way to meet those needs is not provided, then illegitimate or destructive means will be found. My personal opinion on something as grandiose as global terrorism, for example, is that these are simply people who tried to be heard and nobody would listen. And so they shouted a little louder and nobody would listen. So they screamed and nobody would listen. So they did some kind of local demonstration and still it seemed nobody was listening and the problems persisted. People who were starving, people who were homeless, people who were oppressed, people who were subject to continuous injustice, and various individuals standing up saying, would somebody please stop this problem? And to the extent that nobody does, they have to keep escalating to greater and greater and more emphatic means and louder ways of screaming and bigger ways of getting people's attention. If we want to create safety, we have to create a world in which it genuinely feels safe to tell you who I am. It genuinely feels safe for a young man who feels that he might be gay to be able to talk about it and explore the question and find out whether in fact he is, or maybe he is a little bit but not too much, or maybe he's exactly bi, where he could go either way and would be completely happy either way. That he really isn't straight and he really isn't gay, he really is genuinely bi. That's possible too. If there's a young man who thinks he might be a young man who doesn't want to be gay because his parents or his colleagues or his friends or his, wherever he works at a part-time job, if they would all have a problem with it, and the world would become so adversarial that he couldn't deal with it, to where he might even be contemplating suicide because of how overwhelmingly difficult it gets. Sometimes there are young men who are gay, who don't want to be gay, and use the rationalization, oh, I must be bi. Certainly I couldn't be completely gay. I'm just attracted to both. Somehow we seem to have this, society seems to have this perception that being bi is somehow better than being gay, because at least you have the chance of living out your life in a way that more easily fits within a heterosexist paradigm. It's still not best, though, because you have a gay man who's still not being honest. If you have a bisexual youth who is trying to understand what it is to be bisexual, and everyone wants him to repress the same-sex oriented half of that, and yes, you can be bi as long as everything you do looks straight. That's still not being honest. It leaves a major part of him not developed or not explored, not questions and parts of his being that will never be fully embraced. Creating safety is about moving toward unconditional love. To say that if you're bi or if you're gay, it's okay. Well, the gay person who doesn't want to be gay, well, I'm really just bi. And it says, well, that's fine, but if you're really gay, that's okay too. I just hope that you'll be honest with me, and that you can be honest with me if you ever need to talk about it. Because I don't want this to become one more thing to make your life a major struggle. Life is a big enough struggle as it is, just trying to bring all these things into balance. We don't need to complicate it by inserting all sorts of expectations of, quote, normalcy, whatever that is. I once read somebody making the joke that normal is a setting on the washing machine and doesn't really have any relevance beyond that. A lot of washing machines don't even have normal anymore. They're more specific than that, but the metaphor persists. At the heart of all this, though, what we keep coming back to is how do we make it safe? A big part of that, I think, is reining in our expectations. That instead of inviting someone to a party and saying, bring your girlfriend or bring your boyfriend, to say, you're welcome to bring someone with you, if you like, whoever is most important to you. And place no judgments or expectations on that. That if someone shows up with a same-gender companion, that it may be a surprise to us. We didn't know. Oh, okay, well, this is fine. To immediately reassure them that they don't have any judgment to dance around. They don't have any preconceived notions that you were expecting them to live up to. That they can say, I'm not like that. And you'll say, okay, thanks for telling me, without punishing them for their honesty. Ultimately, what this builds up to then is a person who's growing up not threatened by other people's expectations, not threatened by society that won't accept them or that will punish them or will deny them a job or deny them housing or deny them the ability to marry the one they love. Each person needs the freedom to live out his or her life in an empowered, effective sort of way. If we spend our lives struggling for food, for shelter, for clothing, for love, the best parts of that person, the best contributions that person can make won't be part of our world. They won't be made. Imagine for a moment, if you will, a world that is so totally safe, we don't have a police force because nobody ever commits a crime. We don't have a fire department because if anybody's house catches fire, everybody stops what they're doing and rushes over to help. So in a sense, we are all the fire department. We are all the police department. If there's ever a problem, we all come and help. Imagine that there aren't necessarily any paramedics other than maybe people with specialized equipment available within the ambulance. But that when there's a car accident, everybody stops to help. This is a world in which everyone can feel safe in ways that we can't now because we don't live in such a world. If somebody gets a flat tire along the highway and needs to stop and fix their car, and it becomes dangerous because they may not know whether or not they can do it themselves, and they may not expect that anyone will stop to help them. And it creates all sorts of risks that way of being stranded, being late to something important, that may have a big effect on their life if they're not there on time. When strangers stop to help strangers, however, we remember for a moment that underneath it all, we're still one big human family. There is a sense in which we're all interconnected. And the happiness and contentment that is manifest in one person's life, because it is manifest in that person's life, inspires the potential for it to happen in every person's life. If we want to make it safe for youth, for the elderly, for anybody, we have to make it safe for them to ask whatever question is on their mind. To, not demand an answer, but to allow that wrestling with the question to take whatever time it does. Somebody may spend 2 to 3 to 5 to 20 years deciding what their orientation is. If there are no societal expectations, the usual sorts of things of why aren't you married yet? Why don't you have children yet? Isn't this the phase of life where you're supposed to be establishing your career? Where do all these supposed tos come from? They certainly don't come from the truth of our individual lives. There's a sense in which we're all collaborators in creating society, and there's jobs that need to be done. I don't think we have to lecture each other on that, though. I mean, if anyone who's there can see it. It's the unconditional love, though, that inspires each of us to help the others, that inspires the strangers to stop for each other, that inspires people to reach out and help those who they don't even know. Maybe they wouldn't think of helping them, but there's a need in front of them. They have the ability, so why not? Maybe someone would stop and for a car along the road with the hood up, and I'm not an auto mechanic, but I have a cell phone if you need to call someone. The flip side of that, of course, is the longer we have a world where so many people are suffering and in need and it's not safe, the more people resorting to destructive means to get their needs met, and the more difficult it becomes to trust, where people, unfortunate individuals, have found that deceiving someone gets their needs met better than being honest with someone. We have the ability to change that. We have the ability to respond in a way that says, yes, if you're honest with me, it will get your needs met. But if you lie to me, you'll be stuck dealing with your need all over again, or continuously until such time as you move beyond it. Projecting our wounds and our mistrust onto each other creates a dangerous cloud over all of humanity that doesn't need to be there. Remembering that underneath all the struggle and all the loss and the length of time it takes to answer some of the more difficult questions, like what orientation am I anyway? To say that whatever you are, it's okay. And if it's this, I can help with that. And if it's that, I can introduce you to someone. But we're all in this together. I mean, that's really what it comes back to. We're all in this together. Everything's interdependent. And we can create safety, but we are the only ones that really can. And if we don't create the safety, it won't be there. It's all of us working together.